looking, throwing in the end zone. Montana, touchdown, John Taylor.
Young to the air, Young to Jerry Rice, touchdown San Francisco.
Young stumbles on the way back and fires up the middle. Pass is caught by Owens.
Hello and welcome to the 49ers Plus podcast. I'm your host, Al Moriello, and this is your source for the most objective 49ers discussion and analysis, plus timely and entertaining sports and pop culture topics. And today we're going to be talking about Steve Wilks getting fired by the 49ers. Who are some possible candidates to replace him? We're going to discuss 15 free agents that the 49ers have signed, the Brandon Aiyuk situation if he wants out, why Deebo Samuel and George Kittle will not be traded. Then we're going to look at offensive free agents that the 49ers have, a few that they could look to re-sign, and we're going to discuss cap hits and some players that could either be released or restructured to provide some cap relief. In the plus section, we're going to be talking about NBA All-Star Weekend, the slam dunk competition, the three-point competition, and the actual All-Star game, Madam Web bombing at the box office, and the show Loudermilk on Netflix starring Ron Livingston and why you should be watching it. But like always, it starts with the Niners, so let's get right into it.
Let's talk Niners.
So Steve Wilks, defensive coordinator for 1 year in San Francisco, has been relieved of his duties, coming as a shock to many casuals, meaning people in the media who do not follow the 49ers weekly, monthly, or even daily like a lot of us do. And a lot of the 49er beat reporters who are on the scene, reporting from Santa Clara a couple times a week, are not surprised by this. And I think it was really encapsulated during the Super Bowl in the fourth quarter or overtime, whatever it was, when Shanahan took a timeout because he did not like the defense that Wilks had set up. I think it was a 3rd and 6, and he had everybody, 5 defensive backs, beyond the first down line. And that's been an issue with Steve Wilks since he has gotten here. Defensive backs playing way too soft, way too far off of the ball at times. There was first and 15 or 2nd and 15 during the Super Bowl, fourth quarter or overtime, where instead of, I think it was 2nd and 15, it was the play where Marquez Valdes-Scantling caught the ball on the right-hand side, then he was trying to fight for extra yardage, but he was kind of thrown backwards and wound up losing 4 or 5. 2nd and 14, Steve Wilks had everybody at the first down marker, basically saying, here, take 6, 7, or 8 yards. For someone who is steeped in secondary experience, defensive back experience, he does not allow his cornerbacks to challenge receivers the way obviously Steve Spagnuolo allowed Trent McDuffie and Jadavius Sneed to challenge Aiyuk and Deebo Samuel. Beyond that, and this is beyond the Super Bowl, guys, his blitzes weren't well designed. They were ill-timed. They were obvious. Another ill-timed blitz in the Super Bowl where Tony Romo was saying, why are you blitzing here? And it was just very obvious. They basically sent everybody, and they wound up blitzing like 7. And that was a completion, I think, to Rashee Rice across the middle, wound up getting into 49er territory. This is on the overtime drive. But it's not just that. Yes, the first 5 games when they're undefeated, everything is going okay, and people are, thinking everything's going well. Then you have the 3-game losing streak where at Cleveland, they were going up against P.J. Walker, who's a 3rd-string quarterback. They did pick him off twice, fine, but they couldn't stop the run. And this was a game that had rain, a 3rd-string quarterback. You knew they were going to run the ball, and Cleveland still ran it 24 times for 160 yards and a touchdown. It's almost 7 yards a carry. Obviously lost that game, and obviously Brock Purdy got him into position for a Jake Moody field goal, which he missed. The Monday night game against Minnesota, playing against Kirk Cousins, who is a top 10 quarterback, but without Justin Jefferson. The infamous the Vikings have the ball 3rd and 6 from their own 40 with 17 seconds left. They have no timeouts. Wilks sends an all-out blitz. Cousins throws a touchdown pass to Jordan Addison. Vikings wind up winning that game by 5 points. Not to say that if they don't win that, if they don't make that touchdown, the Niners win by 2. I'm not saying that, but if that drive results in no points or worst case scenario, a field goal, could have a different outlook. But again, ill-timed, poorly disguised blitz that and Kyle Shanahan politely chewed him out in the post-game press conference, saying that Steve Wilks knows better, he shouldn't have done that. And as a coach, like in the Super Bowl, Shanahan should have overruled that. Should have called a timeout and said, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So this was a culmination of things. Now we're going to go over some stats where when you look at it and you say in a vacuum, maybe Steve Wilks should not have gotten fired. But I don't think Shanahan wants to worry about the defense in 2024 as much as he possibly did this past season. Remember, he asked Steve Wilks to come down from the booth to the field, which, after, a few weeks, Steve Wilks was saying, I like being able to look in the player's eyes and more timely communication with Fred Warner, among others. So that seemed to be like a big nothing burger, but it also was a way for him to build his rapport with his players. And beyond that, there were rumblings of players not feeling like Wilks was putting them in the best situation. The secondary folks were happy. I know Charvarius Ward, Ambry Thomas spoke very highly of him about how he was able to take their game to the next level. Charvarius Ward for sure being a second-team All-Pro. But he never was able to really connect the back end, the secondary, to the front end, the pass rush. And even with the numbers I'm about to share with you guys, well, let's say this first. I'm going to go over the numbers for the past 5 years to show you where Steve Wilks ranks compared to DeMeco Ryans and Robert Saleh when he was the head coach, the defensive coordinator during the Super Bowl year of 2019. The issue was, though, the last 7 weeks of the regular season, the 49ers defense was a bottom third unit. Run defense was terrible, average, yards per carry, expected yardage over average. Now, he did make some good adjustments in the Packer game and the Lion game in the second half. And for the most part, holding the Chiefs to 19 points, 1 touchdown, is a pretty good job. Now, remember, this isn't the Chiefs of last year, 2019. This isn't the super explosive Chiefs offense. They only scored 2 touchdowns against the Ravens in the AFC Championship game, and none in the second half. So to allow 19 points and then a touchdown drive in overtime is not the most incriminating thing in the world, but it is cumulative. The Niner defense got worse as the season went on, and for the amount of All-Pros and Pro Bowlers they have on the defense, I think Shanahan and us and fans and knowledgeable people that are watching every game expected more. Talking heads in the media are just reacting to the 1 year, and they're casuals. They're generalists. They're not following any one team with a lot of detail. But they're on TV and they get people to listen to them, and people on social media and other places just keep parroting the same crap that they hear without doing the research or understanding it for themselves. But the numbers, let's get into the numbers, guys. So Steve Wilks this year, overall defense, 304 passing total yards. Passing was 214. Rushing was 90 yards a game. Points allowed, 17.5. Turnovers total 28 with 22 interceptions and 48 sacks. All right. And I think people have romanticized DeMeco Ryans' run because his issue in watching, again, every game, and a lot of the games more than once, Was he more aggressive than Steve Wilks? Yes, but he telegraphed his blitzes like crazy. And quite a bit in his first year in 2021. And the first portion in 2022, he started dialing it back. He would send everyone up on the line for almost an all-out blitz, or he would drop one or two people. But he would cause his cornerbacks to play man up on an island, and often they got beat. A Lenore, a Thomas. Charvarius Ward at times, although he held his own, had a much better 2023 than in 2022. But DeMeco Ryans was no tremendous shakes at defensive coordinator overall. We're going to get there, but DeMeco Ryans was not. So last year, 2022, DeMeco Ryans' final year in San Francisco, 301 total yards, so 2 yards less than Wilks. 223 passing yards, so 9 yards more than Wilks' defense. Rushing yards, 78 yards per game, 12 less than Wilks. Points per game, 16.3, 1.2 less than Wilks. Turnovers, 30. 2 more total turnovers, but 2 less interceptions. And 44 sacks by DeMeco Ryans' defense. That's 4 sacks less than Steve Wilks. 2021, DeMeco Ryans' first year, 310 total yards. That's 6 more than Wilks in 2023. 206 passing. So that's the best of these 3 years. So 8 yards per game less than Steve Wilks. 104 rushing yards a game. So that's 14 yards more or worse. 21.5 points per game let up. That's 4 points worse. Only 20 turnovers. 8 fewer than Wilks' defense this past year. And only 9 interceptions, 13 fewer. Still had the same number of sacks, 48. So DeMeco Ryans versus Steve Wilks, if you kind of average it out, DeMeco Ryans 2 years, bit of a wash. And there's certainly some areas where Wilks is better, certainly some areas where DeMeco Ryans perform better. Now, the defense you should be holding the 49ers up against, and this is the perceptual defense that people have of San Francisco, I think, in their head, was 2019. Super Bowl year, Robert Saleh's last year as defensive coordinator. 282 passing yards per game allowed, 21 yards less than Steve Wilks this past year. 169 passing yards allowed per game, 45 yards per game less than Wilks' defense this past year. Rushing was the worst of the 4, 112.6. So that was 22 yards per game more. Points, 19.4, so averaging 2 more points per game than Wilks. 27 turnovers total, 1 less than Wilks. Only 12 interceptions, 10 less than Steve Wilks. And for as much as we want to say that the Niners defense, the defensive line, they were sack masters, 48 sacks again. 2023, 48. 2022, 44. 2021, 48. 2019, 48. 48's not a terrible number, but when you look at the fact that the Eagles put up 70 sacks in 2022, and I think the Ravens or Chiefs had close to 60 this year, 48 is an okay number. Nothing to really get yourself super excited about. And pressures are a separate thing. Great. But let's just go with the tangible sacks. I think, again, I've been saying it, the Niners have been living on a romanticized perception of how good the defense, the pass rush, and even the run defense is. The run defense was 112 a game in 2019, 104 a game in 2021, 78, and then 90. So the past 2 years were obviously their best years. But again, the Niners this year, their last third of the season, let's say, or the last half of the season, really regressed. Significantly regressed. And that was why in some, Steve Wilks was let go. He might have been let go even if the Niners won the Super Bowl. And the candidates that are coming out, and people just are crazy. Bill Belichick and Pete Carroll. So former Pats head coach, former Seahawks head coach. Pete Carroll was the former 49er defensive coordinator 30 years ago, 1995, year after they won the Super Bowl. I don't think they are going to want to become a defensive head coach. I think they would rather sit on the couch, or defensive coordinator. I think they'd rather sit on the couch and relax and wait for a head coaching opportunity maybe next year than be a D coordinator. And as far as Shanahan goes, I'm sure he really wants a obviously he really, really wants a Super Bowl. But if especially Belichick comes in and they win it, even if they win 35-10 in the Super Bowl, Belichick's going to get a lot of that credit. It's going to be a C, Shanahan couldn't win without Belichick. But at the same time, you could say C, Andy Reid couldn't win without Patrick Mahomes. Andy Reid, as great as an offensive coordinator, as a head coach as he was in Philadelphia, could not win a Super Bowl without a generational quarterback. Are you really going to hold that against Andy Reid? John Elway couldn't win a Super Bowl without Terrell Davis those 2 years at running back. Dan Marino never won a Super Bowl, didn't have a good running game. It needs to be a complete picture. Sometimes you can't be so deficient in a certain area and really overcome the deficiencies in the playoffs, in a championship game, or in a Super Bowl. Now, Shanahan's deficiencies are getting away from the run against a team that can't stop the run, and that's both Chiefs' Super Bowl losses. No runs their last 4 snaps in the Super Bowl near midfield when they were only down by 4 points. No runs, all throws. And no runs on the first 2 possessions of the third quarter. Otherwise, went for it on 4th down, threw in a trick play. He was more aggressive than he's been, but he forgets that he is his father's son, and Dad Mike Shanahan loves to run the ball, which Kyle does, but he gets away from it at inopportune times. But back to the candidates. So Bill Belichick's not coming here. I can't imagine Pete Carroll comes here unless he really wants to stick it to the Seahawks. But from what I understand, he is a Seattle Seahawk consultant at the moment. Brandon Staley, former Charger head coach, former Rams defensive coordinator, was the D coordinator for the Rams the year they won the Super Bowl. But his defenses have been ridiculed and shredded in San Diego, and they've had some players, right? Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, Derwin James, some decent linebackers, decent corners. Haven't been able to push through to a playoff win. And then, there are more candidates externally, but internal candidates. Daniel Bullocks is the defensive backs coach. Johnny Holland, linebackers coach. Johnny Holland is battling blood cancer, and he had to step away from the team. Was it last year or the year before for treatment? So knock on wood, right? Hopefully he is on the mend. Hopefully something that he can overcome. It may be a position where the Niners think twice about that much responsibility and stress on someone who isn't 100% health-wise. And then people are mentioning, is there anyone on D'Amico Ryan's staff? Is there anyone on Robert Saleh's staff with the Jets that they can maybe pull over? I think it's going to be some internal hire. I think Shanahan went internally after Saleh left, and that worked out with Ryan's. Bringing in Steve Wilks and not being able to run his system or bring in his own guys did kind of hamstring him and set him up for failure in a way, but that failure should have been in some ways mitigated or overcome by the amount of talent on the defensive side of the ball. Hopefully between, the next week or two, they should definitely have a defensive coordinator before free agency starts because they want to get the input of that D coordinator on who to keep, their own free agents, or who to look at outside of the organization. But again, you can never say absolutely never in this world, but it's as close of a chance to 0% as possible for Belichick or Pete Carroll to be named defensive coordinator. And I don't want someone like a Mike Vrabel because I don't know if he's a great defensive coordinator. He had 1 year in Houston as a DC, did not really go that well, although he wasn't working with a ton of talent. And he may jump ship for a head coaching gig in 2025. I wouldn't mind whoever they bring in. They may not have the secondary players right now, like two really good corners. Travarius Ward, All-Pro. Diamador Lenore, solid. Ambry Thomas, average to below average. They can't run what the Chiefs were running or what the Ravens were running. A lot of man. You need really three, at least above average cornerbacks to do that. The Niners don't have that. Maybe they will have that starting the 2024 season. But I would like to see this team, and I said it in the lead up to the Super Bowl. This team has too many All-Pros and Pro Bowlers, too much talent to be a bend but don't break defense. Because the upper echelon quarterbacks, of course a Patrick Mahomes, but a Josh Allen potentially, a Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts maybe, although they absolutely smoked the Eagles this year 42-19, and Phil Simms' son, on Pro Football Network came out and said Jalen Hurts is the most overrated player in the league. And when you think about it, the amount of talent that he has offensively, the offensive line that he has, best offensive line in the league, and the fact that, 75% of his rushing touchdowns are 1 or 2 yard tush pushes. I don't know if he's the most overrated player in the league, but he is overrated. He honestly is. Great fantasy quarterback, but overrated actual NFL quarterback. Kirk Cousins, when everybody's fully healthy. Matt Stafford, these are teams that will break the bend but don't break defense. I want to see this team start playing downhill. I want to see this defense specifically playing with more aggression, challenging receivers, challenging the offense and the offensive scheme as a whole. It's great to be able to rush for and generate pressure and maybe cause an incompletion, a sack, a throwaway, an interception, whatever it may be. But the front four this year, if we're saying it wasn't that great in 2021, wasn't that great in 2022, wasn't as good as we remember it in 2019. If this was a defense generating between 58 and 70 sacks, then yeah, rush 4 or 5 to your heart's content and play coverage, play zone, play soft when you need to. And there's times to play soft. 3rd and 15, sure, line up 10 yards deep. 1st and 15, no need to do it. 2nd and 15, no need to do it. Challenge receivers. Make them work for those 7 or 8 yards versus just absolutely giving it to them, which is what one of Wilks's fatal flaws was. And he is an aggressive defensive coordinator by nature. And Shanahan apparently told him to blitz less. So a lot of this is on Shanahan. He neutered Wilks in a way. Whoever he brings in, he's going to want to run this still wide 9 defensive line, cover 3 defense, fine. But how about a little bit more contesting the defense, playing up, challenging, timely blitzes, disguising blitzes, playing downhill, playing how the Chiefs and Ravens played, but maybe not with so much of a man-to-man element because they don't have those secondary players. I don't care who the candidate is. That's what I want to see. There's too much talent on this defense to be a read and react defense. This should be an exert your will defense when they need to. Or make things difficult the vast majority of the time defense because they're so athletic and there's so many Pro Bowlers plus, right? Otherwise, it feels like wasting the talent or not maximizing the talent. So I don't care about the candidate. I care about the philosophy. Now let's quickly move on to San Francisco signed 15 players. Many of these were players on their practice squad. Some were some outside signings, but let's go through them. They signed offensive tackle Sebastian Gutierrez, safety Corey Luciano, who was on the practice squad to end the season and does have potential to be a backup center behind Jake Brendel. Tight end Jake Tongs was on the practice squad. Wide receiver Tay Martin, practice squad as well. Defensive tackles T.Y. McGill, veteran, and Spencer Wage, both on the practice squad to end the season. Defensive ends, they're loading up here. Alex Barrett was on the practice squad the past couple seasons. Austin Bryant signed last offseason on and off the practice squad, concluded the season on the practice squad. Now there's some new additions. Ernest Brown IV played with the Rams. Defensive end experience. Raymond Johnson III and Sam Okeanu, who could play inside as well as a D tackle. But at least 4 defensive ends. Now, are any of these players going to make the roster? I think Austin Bryant and Ernest Brown have a chance. And we're going to get into defense in the next podcast, but San Francisco, and let's go through the other positions. Linebacker Curtis Robinson was on the practice squad all season, refused to sign with another team and come off the practice squad because he wanted to see everything through with San Francisco. Could be maybe not a replacement starter for Dre Greenlaw, but a replacement on the active roster as one of probably the 5 linebackers they're going to carry. Cornerback Keemon Hall ended on the practice squad. Taylor Hawkins ended on the practice squad, although he injured his wrist week 18 against the Rams and was put on IR. And veteran safety Eric Harris also ended on the practice squad. Who was not signed to a contract? Running back Ty Davis Price, another 3rd-round running back waste because they are not drafting the right kind of dual role backs. Similar to what McCaffrey can do. There are running backs in the draft, everybody, that are both runners and can add a little something or more than a little something from the receiving game. They just got to draft somebody like that. 49er Web Zone website favorite, Ilm Manning, undrafted free agent, guard, center. So many people were clamoring, he's going to make the active roster. I was saying, come on, guys, it's cool to root for an underdog, but he's not going to make the active roster. He did not, didn't even make the practice squad, eventually became a practice squad player, got signed by the Arizona Cardinals to their active roster, got released back to the Niners practice squad to end 2023 and was not signed, at least right now, by the 49ers. So training camp heroes, training camp crushes usually amount to nothing. And wide receiver Willie Snead, veteran who saw, I think, 3 elevations, if not more, during the playoffs, has currently not been signed. So listen, loaded up on defensive ends. Right now on their team, they have signed for next year Nick Bosa, Drake Jackson, who's recovering from some sort of knee injury, we don't know what, and Robert Beal, who will now be in his 2nd year. They're going to have 5 defensive ends that are going to make the 53-man roster. I have some thoughts on players they may re-sign in the next podcast, but they have 4, if not 5, additional defensive ends signed to their roster, and I think there's 2 of them, Austin Bryant and Ernest Brown IV, that could potentially make their way on the 53-man roster next September, but we are not there yet. And we're going to go over, like I mentioned, we're going to go over defense in next week's podcast. So let's transition to offense. The Brandon Aiyuk situation. If you guys aren't familiar, his girlfriend or fiance now, I'm not sure if they're engaged, went on social media before or after the Super Bowl saying it's his last year in San Francisco. We're so thankful for our time. I think his brother, one of his friends, was echoing the same sort of sentiment on social media. One, if this wasn't premeditated, players, you have to get your friends and significant others in line. This is not helping. If it is premeditated, then it's all part of some sort of master plan of looking like, a pouty diva, similar to what Deebo Samuel did 2 years ago. Listen, and Aiyuk was visibly upset after the Super Bowl. They asked, does he want to be back in San Francisco? And he said, if that's the right move, yeah. And when asked what the right move is, his answer was winning a championship. Well, teams that you've been linked to being traded to, the Raiders, the Giants, and the Patriots, are nowhere close to that. The Niners are not going to trade you to the Ravens. They're not going to trade you to the Chiefs. They're not going to trade you to the Lions. Any team, especially in the NFC, that is close to winning a championship. And he is under contract, his 5th-year rookie year option for $14 million guaranteed. Now, so he's under contract. Asking someone how they're feeling the day after the Super Bowl is not the greatest. You're going to get raw emotion, right? He had 6 targets during the Super Bowl, 3 catches for 49 yards. He and Purdy misconnected on a deep shot to the end zone. As far as targets go, he was 3rd on the team in targets. Deebo had 11. McCaffrey caught all 8 of his targets. Aiyuk had a great season, 75 catches, 1,342 yards, 7 touchdowns, Pro Bowler. He does not get a ton of volume in terms of targets because of how much they run the ball, but make no mistake, he is their number one receiver. Their number one wide receiver. He was their number one wide receiver starting in 2022. So all of 2022 and all of last year. Here's his stats. In 4 seasons with the Niners, he has 269 receptions, 3,931 yards, and 25 total touchdowns. Now compare that with Deebo in 5 years as a receiver. Deebo, 283 receptions, so 14 more than Aiyuk. 4,122 yards, so about 190 yards more than Aiyuk in a season more. And 19 touchdowns versus Aiyuk's 25. Now, yes, Deebo has missed a good amount, some games in there. Aiyuk has missed less, still. But what Deebo does bring is, in addition to 4,122 receiving yards, 1,007 rushing yards and 19 rushing touchdowns. Deebo got a $25 million a year contract after the 2021 season when he had over 1,400 yards receiving. Similar year to Aiyuk receiving. Guys, anybody saying, well, they're going to have to release Brandon Aiyuk because of the salary cap, they're casuals. They don't understand how the cap works. They don't understand how you can free up money. They don't understand that there's other players that they can restructure or release that will accommodate Brandon Aiyuk. Now, yes, he is guaranteed $14 million for 2024. And right now, the 49ers are $12.4 million over the cap. But they still have, with the 15 players they signed, right now, they can field a football team. They have 55 players or 54 players under contract. They're going to get 8 to 11 more in the draft. They're going to bring back a couple free agents, and you're going to have to get to 90 for your training camp roster anyway. But here's something a lot of people don't know. I'm not going to say if. When the 49ers extend Brandon Aiyuk, they're going to save $10.4 million on the salary cap for 2024. So his $14 million cap hit is going to go down to $3.6 million. So right there, now they're only $2 million over the cap. They are not going to let Brandon Aiyuk go. They should be taking a hard stance like we do with Deebo. The Niners shouldn't be paying. The Niners didn't want to pay 2 defensive tackles a lot of money back in 2020 when they traded DeForest Buckner to the Colts for a first-round pick that became Javon Kinlaw, bust, and re-signed Eric Armstead, which we're going to get into next week, coming off of a career year, 10 sacks, and he's making a whole lot of money, which might not be justified anymore. But you don't break up the team when your window for winning a Super Bowl is 2024 and 2025. Then you can start making some difficult decisions because Brock Purdy is going to get $40+ million a year, and it's going to totally blow up your positional allocations for what you're willing to spend. Would I be shocked if they trade Aiyuk? No, because if he puts up a stink and he wants to go somewhere, and let's say they could flip Brandon Aiyuk for Calvin Ridley because the Jaguars may release him, because if the Jaguars re-sign him, they owe the Falcons a second-round pick. So maybe the Niners and Jaguars can work something out where you're swapping receivers, and maybe the Niners get some sort of pick back, plus the Falcons have to get something freely. I don't know what it would work out to be. That was the only thing that kind of thought in my head. If you're going to trade him, you got to get something of value at the receiver spot in return, and maybe someone you can sign for cheaper than Aiyuk. All that being said, Aiyuk has chemistry with Brock Purdy. I would do everything I can to sign Brandon Aiyuk to an extension similar to what Deebo's got. And no matter what happens in 2024, you go into next offseason, 2025, and then you relook at it and say, okay, Is Deebo wearing down? Can we trade Deebo? Is there anybody else that we can trade? I would keep Aiyuk over Deebo 7 out of 7 days over the week. But you can only keep Aiyuk if you sign him. You can push this salary cap decision off, guys, for another year or two. You don't have to make the decision today. You don't have to make it this off season. And anybody that's saying, oh, they're going to have to cut this and do that, you don't have to do that. You can rework contracts and push the decisions off until after the 2025 season. Again, because that's when Purdy's extension is going to kick in. And the same thing I'm hearing a lot of, trade Deebo, trade Kittle. No, you don't break up your offensive core when your Super Bowl window is still open. You don't do that. And don't say, well, look at A.J. Brown who got traded. The Titans were going nowhere. Why spend that much money on a receiver to just still be a mediocre franchise? It made more sense to trade him for a first-round pick. Now, they picked up who? Trayvon Burks or whatever, and he hasn't been all that good. So that's there are, be careful what you think you're going to get, because you are just not slotting in a receiver to take Aiyuk's place at all. At all. Calvin Ridley and the Jaguars, some sort of a swap and pick swap or whatever, would be the closest to it, but I would still not do it. Aiyuk's been durable. Best route runner on the team. Great hands. Good blocker. And that's going to cost money. You pay it. Pay for this offense. You already got a lot of all-pros and Pro Bowlers on the defense. Pay to make the offense stick together and be explosive again so you can make another run in 2024 and 2025. But Kittle's not going to get traded. Oh, he's 31 years old. Travis Kelce's 34, guys. Kittle's got 2 or 3 more good years left. If they trade Kittle, $18 million in dead money, saves only $4 million. No reason. Trading Deebo, $14 million in dead money. Dead cap hit. Does save $14 million. But again, we saw what the offense was for 3 games, right? Without Trent Williams and Deebo Samuel. Not great. Cleveland, Minnesota, and Cincinnati. 3 not pushover teams, and Cleveland had the number 1 defense all year. I get it. But there is no reason to break this up when you're only $12.4 million over the cap, and you can save a little over 10 by extending Aiyuk. And there's other things that they can do. I'm going to go into it for the offense momentarily and the defense in next podcast. But they're going to have to make decisions at some point. You don't have to make them now. If you want to load up and make another Super Bowl run, you keep as many of the pieces as possible that you can. Have a good draft and rookies that actually play, because that's a big Shanahan no-no. He doesn't play rookies. And 1, 2, or 3 modest free agent signings that supplement what you're doing already. And of course, a defensive coordinator that's going to run what Kyle wants, but to my liking is going to be more aggressive and more of a set the tempo, dictate the pace type of a defense. Let's switch gears to free agents that the 49ers have this offseason. We'll go through position by position and what they made in 2023. So wide receivers, Ray McCloud made $2 million. Chris Conley, $1.1 million. And Juwan Jennings, $940,000. He is a restricted free agent. So the 49ers can offer him a tender, which equates to a dollar amount. And if a team signs McCloud, they would owe him a pick in that round, quote unquote, that the tender was made. So essentially they have 2 options. They can place a second round tender on Jennings, which his salary would be $4.3 million for 2024 guaranteed, or an original round tender, and he was drafted in the 7th round, and his contract would be $2.7 million guaranteed. You know, not a huge difference between $4.3 million and $2.7, but when you compare what he was making, $940,000, you know, that's, you know, multiples of 3 and 4 in a way. I don't think anyone will give up a second round pick for Juwan Jennings. I think a team might give up a 7th round pick for Juwan Jennings at that $2.7 million number, but not a second round pick at the $4.3 million number. Listen, I like Juwan Jennings. I like him a lot. He's a dog. They call him third down Juwan for what he picks up. He runs hard. He plays with some attitude. He's a good blocker. But here's what also he is. He averages 26 catches a year. He is not an outside receiver. He is not someone, and I've heard some lunacy on social media of, well, if they trade Aiyuk, then, Jennings could be a starter. He is not at all an outside starting wide receiver in this league. Too slow, not a fantastic route runner, and his hands are suspect at times. Now, instead of, biting the bullet on a $4.3 million guaranteed contract for 2024, maybe the Niners go with something in between, like a modest multi-year deal, maybe a 2 or 3, say a 3-year deal worth $9 million. Maybe $2 million of that is guaranteed. I'm just throwing out numbers here. So you're getting, somewhere between, and maybe the first year is only, $1.5 or $2 million cap. Then the next year it goes up and it goes up. $4.3 million isn't a lot for a receiver, but it would be a third receiver. And when you have players like, Cleveland Ferrell only made $2.5 million this year, 2023, Jennings made $940,000, McLeod $2 million, Conley $1.1. Let's not go nuts over Juwan Jennings. Nice receiver. 26 catches a year. Can't play outside. Relegated to big slot. Do I want him back? Sure. Absolutely. But he's also, when we're talking about positionless football that Kyle Shanahan always quotes, he is not a positionless player. You cannot put him anywhere other than big slot. He is not going to win outside against starting NFL boundary corners. But I do think they should re-sign him. Tight ends, Ross Dwelly made $1.7 million this past year. Charlie Werner, $870,000. So they have Kittle. They have Cam Latu, who was on IR his rookie year, and Braden Willis, who was just really an extra blocker. I could see them bringing Warner back as a blocking specialist if they can develop Latu or Braden Willis as another receiving option outside of George Kittle. And they leave Kittle in line next to the tackle to block quite a bit. So the Niners, to me, need a viable number 2 tight end receiving option. Because Kittle can obviously block. Braden Willis has showed some blocking. Latu should be able to block a little bit. Is a Zach Ertz out of the question? I don't know how much he would ask. He was signed to the Detroit Lions practice squad before the NFC Championship game, was not activated. Do they look at a veteran tight end that has blocking and receiving skills to go along with Kittle, who's a veteran, but also 2 very young players? Latu, no experience, and Braden Willis played sparingly this year. So I don't see them bringing Dwelly back. I could see them bringing Warner back, but I would rather see them bring in a veteran that has a better shot at being the number 2 tight end. Quarterback, Sam Darnold, $4.5 million in 2023. Brandon Allen made $1.2 million. I'd be okay with bringing Darnold back, but at half that. $2.5 or $3 million. That was around what Gardner Minshew made for the Colts. And I don't know if he had incentives because he played basically 14, 15 games for them. But I think a backup at 4.5 and then someone behind him at 1.2, you're looking at $5.7 million in quarterbacks who did not see the field, fortunately, this year since Purdy was healthy, other than week 18, which was a throwaway game against the Rams. I wouldn't mind bringing Darnold back, but for less. Listen, every $500,000, every $1 million counts at this point. Cut it down, see what interest he gets. I don't know who you're bidding against for Sam Darnold come mid-March, but if you can get him for $2.5 million with incentives, playing time incentives, sure. And Brandon Allen for 1.2, if you could bring him back on a vet minimum, sure. Maybe there's a developmental rookie that they can draft to be the number 3 quarterback. Because then you could have a cheap backup for 4 years around what Brock Purdy's making. Guards, offensive guards, Matt Pryor, 1.1 million, Ben Barch, 940,000. Matt Pryor wasn't active for any of the playoff games or Super Bowl. Ben Barch was as a backup guard. Could be a decent depth piece, but he's another one that's a restricted free agent. I don't know if the 49ers can just say, we're just going to bypass this whole restricted free agent stuff. And if they want to sign him to a modest deal, like a 2-year deal, maybe 2 years, $3 million, something like that, modest, because they don't want to get it. Now, Ben Barch was a 4th-round pick. So his original round tender would be a 4th at $2.7 million or a 2nd-round tender at $4.3 million. Again, I don't think Ben Barch, for someone who didn't play at all, is worth $2.7 million as purely a backup. Unless they're really convinced someone would sign him and the Niners would get a 4th-round pick. I think they go elsewhere, specifically the draft, to find a backup guard. Because remember, they're bringing back Trent Williams, Aaron Banks at left guard, Jake Brendel at center. Right now, Spencer Burford at right guard, Colton McKivitz at right tackle. Their swing tackle is Jalen Moore. Their backup guard center maybe is Nick Sakiel. So they have 7 offensive linemen signed. Plus Corey Luciano and Sebastian Gutierrez. So you have your backup center, a backup center, and a backup tackle, if they even only just make it onto the practice squad. I think they can do better at guard in the draft. If they draft a guard, then Spencer Burford is your backup at your guard spots. Jalen Moore is your backup at your tackle spots, and Nick Sakiel could be in the works as well. Remember, too, if the Niners draft a tackle, which is very possible with their 1st-round pick, that may solve the guard issue, too, because that would move Colton McKivitz from right tackle to right guard, which I think would be an upgrade over Spencer Burford. And you would still have Jalen Moore as your swing tackle. You would add Burford as an interior player and Nick Sakiel as an interior player. And if Corey Luciano is your backup center, then you have 9 offensive linemen on your roster. I do see them addressing this in the draft and maybe a vet free agent. And John Feliciano, who played guard but has experience at center, could come back. I think he had a nice season for the 49ers. Made $2.5 million last year. If they can get him for 2, if they can get him for that or a little bit less, I'd be open to him coming back. Or if there's another veteran that could be a center guard swing that is a little less than $2.5 million. Again, they're going to be scraping to get by and get under the salary cap in some ways. If they don't make, if they're either going to re-sign or trade Aiyuk. So his $14 million is going to come off the book. 14 or 10 million will come off the book no matter what. 10 million if they re-sign him. 10 million less of a cap hit. But if they want to re-sign a Jennings and it's going to cost, 2 or 3 million a year, then obviously we're creeping up. And if there's any other additions, a Charlie Warner will probably need to make $200,000 more than his $870K contract. Darnold, where is that going to fall? So any signings they're making obviously is going to add to the salary cap. So I'm just trying to figure out, if they can get some players less than what they made last year, even though obviously it's going to increase the cap. And now we're going to look at some cap hits and a player that I think has to take a salary reduction, Kyle Juszczyk. Kyle Juszczyk, fullback, has the 12th highest cap hit on the team, $7.6 million cap hit. If they release him outright, cut him, before June 1st, this would be actually a greater savings after June 1st. But if they release him before June 1st, they'd be on the hook for $2.7 million, but save $4.9 million. His contract, his total contract, the average annual value of his contract was $5.4 million when he signed it 2 years ago. That's $1.4 million average per year, more than any other fullback. And if you rank his average annual value salary, $5.4 million, or cost, $5.4 million, that would rank 16th among running backs. Forget fullbacks, running backs. If they restructure his deal, and he's 32 years old, and he's in a weird way the de facto, tight end 2 now, because there is no other tight end other than Kittle that gets more than 3 receptions a season. A restructure saves the team $2.3 million. But that obviously would be pushing money back into future years. I think they should rework his contract so his cap hit is similar to what it would be if they release him. So he should be, even though he's a valuable piece on the team, he should not have a $7.6 million hit. It should be closer to the $3 million range. So if they can rework his contract where his cap hit is closer to what it would be if he was released, meaning if they release him, they would save $4.9 million, but they would be on the hook for 2.7. That's the number they should be working from or near, 2.7. Juszczyk does have value to this team as a blocker, as a receiver, not so much as a runner, but let's not, again, just fall in love with the player because he's been on the team for maybe, is it 7 years now? 17, 18, 19, 20, 22? Yeah, 7 years. His last 3 years, receptions, 30, then 19, then 14. His last 3 years, rushing attempts, 8, 7, 5. It's not as easy to say any fullback out there or fullback in the draft can do what Juszczyk does. I mean, you saw the catches, he made in the Super Bowl, in the NFC Championship game. He is a valuable piece, but he is underperforming compared to what he's going to get paid or what his cap it's going to be. Bring him back, but you're going to have to cut that cap hit at least in half. People have thrown out Colton McKivitz, offensive tackle. If you cut him, you save $3 million. Guys, that's dirt cheap for a right tackle. Dirt cheap. And did he really perform any worse than Mike McGlinchey, who got a humongous contract from the Broncos? They still have McKivitz. It was only a 2-year deal for 2024. They could do a lot worse for a lot more money. McKivitz is not going anywhere. And we talked about why trading Kittle and Deebo doesn't make any sense. Restructuring or extending them could. Again, Kittle's 31, Kelsey's 34, still in the league. Still in the league at a high level. And I think Kittle's evolution the next couple of years needs to be from blocking less to being split out and just more of just a receiving tight end, the way Kittle is, the way Antonio Gates was for the Chargers. What Tony Gonzalez became from going from the Chiefs to the Falcons. If they restructure Kittle's contract, they save $9.2 million in 2024. If they extend him, $9.8 million is saved. If they restructure Deebo's contract, saves them $15 million against the cap this year. If they extend him, it's $16.1 million in 2024, this upcoming season. Both players are signed through 2025, so they only have 2 more seasons left on their deal. Even though Deebo's younger, the way he plays, and Kittle's been injured too and banged up and all this good stuff, I would almost rather restructure Kittle to ensure he's a Niner for life in a modest way. I'm sorry, I would rather extend Kittle and structure it in a way that he's a Niner for life. And if Deebo, I would let this year play out. If you want to restructure him and it's not totally damaging to the next couple of years, sure. But if it's a situation where you can sign Aiyuk long-term and you get through 2024 and they're able to trade Deebo, or you extend him and you're still able to trade him in a year or two, you do that. I would extend Kittle's contract, get that nearly $10 million in savings, and I would leave Deebo alone unless they think an extension still leaves them with an out later on to release him or trade him with not a super significant cap hit. Now, that's going to conclude the Niners section of the podcast for today. Next week, we're going to go over the defensive side of the ball where there are additional and significant savings to be had. So just right off the bat, Aiyuk saves you $10 million. We're not figuring in who they're going to have to re-sign. Aiyuk extension saves you $10 million. Reworking Juice's contract could save you another $4 million. Restructuring Kittle saves you another 10. You're at $24 million, bringing you $12 million under the cap before you sign anybody else, Jawan Jennings, whoever it may be. You're now $12 million under the cap before you touch the defensive side of the ball with either releases or restructures. And we will get into that next podcast. That concludes the Niners section. Stick around. We're going to be talking about NBA All-Star Weekend, the movie Madame Web, and the Netflix series Loudermilk. Stay right here.
It's plus time.
So NBA All-Star Weekend was this past weekend. I watched some of the skills competition, a little bit of the main three-point shootout, which was it? Damian Lillard wound up winning. It's a nice event. The game itself we'll get into was terrible. Defending champ Mac McClung winds up beating Jaylen Brown of the Celtics in the dunk contest. He needed nearly a perfect dunk to beat Jaylen Brown, and Mac McClung winds up jumping over Shaq with a reverse dunk to win the dunk contest again. Why is this noteworthy? Because he's a 6'2" white dude who last year was in the G League, but dunked for the Sixers, or might have been on the Sixers squad for a little bit, and I forget who he was playing for this year, but had some phenomenal dunks. Good to see, you want to say the underdog win, because he won it last year, but I guess physically and looking at him, perceptually, he's a bit of an underdog, because did any of us ever think we would see like a white guy, let alone a 6'2" white guy win the NBA dunk contest? But exciting dunks again, good for him, and we'll see if he can three-peat. I think he's only one of 4 players, including Michael Jordan, to win a dunk contest back-to-back. So for as much as you're going to be waiting with bated breath for next year's All-Star Weekend, hopefully Mac McClung will be in it to go for the three-peat. They did have an interesting three-point shootout between the NBA, Steph Curry, and the WNBA, represented by Sabrina Ionescu. I think, there was some controversy with something that Kenny Smith said during the broadcast. I think it was just a weird, not on a level playing field type of situation. So Steph Curry was shooting from the NBA three-point line with an NBA ball. Ionescu was using a WNBA ball, which makes sense, but she was also shooting from the NBA line, which doesn't make sense to me. And I understand that they're not going to put in, or maybe just for the competition, are they able to quickly put in the woman's three-point line, which is a 1.5 feet closer. So Sabrina was a good sport and shot from the actual NBA line. And Steph had 29 points. Sabrina had 26 points. She was shooting phenomenally. But to me, it doesn't, whether you're using a different ball or not, you are asking a player to shoot farther than what she's normally accustomed to, or where the three-point line is in her WNBA league. Now, does she shoot farther than that occasionally or from time to time, or a lot of the time? I don't even know. Yeah, probably. And I think the corners probably aren't 1.5 feet farther out. I think it's probably more, the top of the key that they're talking. But still, I think she was actually at a disadvantage, and she performed really, really well. So, all love, to Steph Curry and Sabrina for doing this, and great showings by both athletes. Hopefully they'll do this, again next year. But the main game, man, first 211 to 186 East over the West. First time a game's gone over 200 points by a team. No defense being played. Everybody was driving to the rim and then kicking out to someone open for three. I think there was, over like close to 53 pointers per team. Like it was an embarrassing game. At least in years past, when you had LeBron and Giannis draft teams, there were charities they were playing for each quarter. Whichever team won the quarter, the money got to go to a charity. You saw some defense. You saw some, I won't use the word intensity, but moderate intensity. This was a joke. This was a complete exhibition. I don't know what they're going to do to it. Should they just make it a skills contest or figure out a way? Because people are saying that they don't want to get hurt. Injuries in the NBA are so less frequent than injuries in the NFL. You can understand why the Pro Bowl game was taken away. But even then, you really can't name that many injuries that have happened during a Pro Bowl game. But the actual tackle Pro Bowl game versus, flag football, you can still get hurt playing flag football. Plant your knee the wrong way. I mean, look at all the non-contact injuries, ankle, Achilles, knee that happen in the NFL. Do people get injured in the NBA? Sure, but it's not as frequent, especially if you're talking about back, hip, lower body type things. But the game has just become an absolute unwatchable, I don't call it disgrace, but just an unwatchable playing at half speed exhibition. And one of the players was quoted as saying, well, you really can't play defense when people are shooting 40 or 50 feet deep. Like, yeah, but you weren't playing defense in the paint. And the only reason they were shooting 40 or 50 feet deep was because most of this game was kickouts for threes. It just brutal to watch if you're there and you're hoping to get autographs or C player, all these great players on the court and the skills competition. That's one thing, but boy, is it brutal. And I think I'm preaching to the choir there. Now let's transition from sports to movies. So Madam Web, starring Dakota Fanning, Sydney Sweeney, and others, had a $15.3 million domestic opening. It performed a little bit better than that. It was about $25 million if you count Wednesday through Monday, starting at Valentine's Day through the President's Day holiday weekend. In total, $52 million worldwide. Now, there were rumblings that Dakota Fanning, wasn't, she wasn't being throwing tantrums, but not being a good sport on the junkets, the circuit. Once she saw the trailer, she fired her agent. Everybody knew this was going to be a bomb. Everybody, their mothers, their cousins, their pets, their chia pets, trees, pet rocks. Everybody knew this was going to be a bomb. And it sounds like Sony was late in the game, Sony Pictures, into understanding how much of a bomb this was going to be. Because if you use the 2.5 times multiplier, there were numbers that it cost $80 million to produce. Then they said the real number was low hundreds. You could average out 90 million. But I'm going to use the $80 million to produce number just to make the movie. The 2.5 multiplier includes advertising overseas, and Sony only getting 50% of the ticket sales means that Madam Web has to hit $200 million worldwide to break even. They're at $52 million now. It will not get there. And you only need to look to Morbius, the vampire movie by Sony Entertainment from 2022? Yeah, 2 years ago. $80 million to make, $167 million worldwide cum, lost over $30 million. And they actually re-released. Morbius was becoming such a joke, such an internet meme, that they actually re-released the film. Was it sometime last year? And obviously still nobody cared. Now what's up next? Kraven the Hunter releases August 30th of this year. It's going to be rated R, which immediately will be dipping into anything it's going to make. This is the Sony Spider-Man Cinematic Universe. Madam Web, Morbius, Kraven. But oops, it doesn't contain Spider-Man. But Sony, since they bought the rights from Marvel, has a contract with them that they need to release a movie. The numbers vary, but based on what I'm going to share with you, it seems like the number could be every 5 years, or that's what it was in the past. And maybe there is a renegotiated deal when they agreed to let Spider-Man into the MCU with Tom Holland, with the first movie, Spider-Man Homecoming. But originally, it might have been every 5 years. The first Sony Spider-Man movie came out in 2002. This is the trilogy with Tobey Maguire. Then Spider-Man 2 was 2004. Spider-Man 3 was 2007. There was no Spider-Man or related movie until Amazing Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield in 2012. So there's your 5-year gap. Then there was Amazing Spider-Man 2 in 2014. The next Spider-Man related movie would have been No Way Home. I'm sorry, Homecoming, 2016. Or no, I'm sorry, it might have been Civil War, where Spider-Man was introduced in 2015 or 16. Then the next year was Homecoming with Tom Holland again. But those were MCU, Sony Pictures, joint type of things. But I guess that counts for the timeline. It counts for the duration of, you need to make another movie within a certain amount of time, Sony, either with us, Marvel, or by yourselves, or the rights revert back to us, back to Marvel. So they say that was 2015, 2016-ish. For Sony, independently, you have Venom in 2018, which was a hit, made over $40 million worldwide. Then you have, in 2018 also, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Very well done animated movie, made about $350 million worldwide. Then you have a wait until 2021 with Venom 2. Let There Be Carnage. Made $300 million less than Venom 1. Now, this was still, it was coming off the pandemic. I don't think it opened in China, which was a large market. But all that does not matter to the bottom line. That still seemed to turn a profit for Sony. Venom turned a large profit. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, the first one, did turn a decent profit, and Venom an okay profit. Now you're getting into bombs. 2022, Morbius lost $30 million. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, 2023, made about twice as much as the first movie on a slightly higher budget, so very profitable film for Sony. So Morbius bombed, $30 million in debt. Madam Web 2024 is going to be at least $30 million in the red. And then Craven comes out again this year. I'm sure that's going to lose money as well. So Sony is living off of whatever they made, the Spider-Man trilogy, 2002, 2004, 2007, good. Amazing Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield, 2012, 2014. And then they had Venom. Then they had Marvel joint ventures with Tom Holland being Spider-Man and Venom being profitable, and Into the Spider-Verse and Venom 2. So when you look at it, the bombs aren't killing Sony. Morbius losing 30 plus million isn't going to kill Sony. Madam Web losing probably 40 to 50 plus million isn't going to kill Sony. Craven coming out now as an R-rated movie without Spider-Man in it again. I don't know really who's going to see this movie and make it profitable. So you can't really say, why is Sony making these movies? Maybe they thought, well, maybe Venom was an anti-hero bad guy. Maybe Morbius or, Madam Web. Maybe we can, play to a female audience. Craven's another anti-hero kind of bad guy. Morbius is not Venom. Venom is a super popular character. Morbius is not. Craven is not. Madam Web, they made the mistake of thinking, well, maybe we can tap into the female comic book audience to drive up ticket sales. But the research shows that 75% of the audience for comic book movies are male. Whether they're adults, middle-aged, senior citizens, or kids, 70 to 75% are male. You are not going to get women to see a comic book movie because it's headlined by women. Only 25 to 30% of women want to see a comic book movie. And it's not like that they want to see men, although having an attractive lead like a Chris Hemsworth or a Tom Hardy with Venom will help. They're not going to want to go see attractive women just because they're superheroes. If anything, you're hoping for like the perverted prepubescents or 20-somethings that want to go there, get a seat in the back row, and whack off to Sydney Sweeney. Again, I don't think these flops are really going to put such a dent in Sony's pocketbook or wallet that they're not going to make movies anymore. But why are you rushing to put out crap movies? Morbius in 2022, Madame Web in 2024, Kraven in 2024. What's the rush? You had Venom 2 in 2021. Did you feel like you had to come out with another movie, a Morbius movie in 2022? You have Across the Spider-Verse. So Spider-Verse Part 2 came out in 2023. Why are you rushing 2 bad movies this year, Sony, 2024? 2 movies in 2024. If you spread the garbage out to every 2 years, I guess it doesn't matter. It's just garbage. But why are you still rushing? You're rushing to lose money. Why are you doing that? And they had another movie on the slate. They had a Sinister Six movie that was supposed to come out 7 years ago, never did. They had another movie on the slate, an El Muerto, who is a wrestler in the Spider-Man universe that winds up becoming a bad guy. They took that off of their calendar. Good move, Sony. I mean, we could have told you that 5 years ago. And you created you created a Spider-Man cinematic universe without Spider-Man. What do you think was going to happen? And I don't know if Tom Holland or any other Spider-Man is going to be part of your universe, but they could have been. You could have had a Miles Morales Ultimate Spider-Man live action. You could have had a Spider-Man 2099 live action. You could have done even a different Ultimate Spider-Man. Make up your own character that's not created to the comic books. Miles Morales and Spider-Man 2099 are part of the animated Spider-Verse series of movies, and they are profitable. And I'm not saying if you made either one of those characters live action instead of animated, that if it would have been more profitable, because Sony shows that it cannot figure out, well, it can't figure out the non-Spider-Man formula, but I'm not totally convinced it can figure out the Spider-Man formula coming off of what they did in Amazing Spider-Man 2. Marvel had to help them reboot it because Marvel gets its characters. I don't know what lies ahead for Sony after Kraven in August. I don't know what's on the slate coming down the pike, but they can just let it breathe. The next Spider-Verse movie, I think, either comes out in 2024 or 2025. Just pin your profits on that. It will make money. It'll probably make somewhere between part 1 and part 2, which is still a really good haul. And then while this is in development, figure out, okay, what should come out in 2027? Nothing needs to come out in 2025. No live action needs to, or 2026. It's going to be shit no matter what it is. Figure it out. Whether you want to do a Green Goblin, a Dr. Octopus, a Sinister Six movie. But again, none of these characters work without Spider-Man. Maybe by then they could figure out how to pull Tom Holland in as Spider-Man or another character. I mean, if you're going to play in the Spider-Verse in the animated sense, bring it into live action. I'm not crying for Sony, but I am just curious how they created remember, Sony was the picture house production company that created, remember the Monsterverse? It was supposed to be a whole bunch of monster movies, the first being The Mummy with Tom Cruise. And not that it was a reboot of The Mummy with Brendan Fraser, and that whole cast from 99 and 2002. But that was supposed to launch a monster cinematic universe, but The Mummy was received so poorly, that universe fizzled. This universe is fizzling. It's on its death throes in terms of what they're trying to do live action. Venom 3 is going to make less money than Venom 2. It just is. It's going to be a bad movie. People will go that are Venom fans and like Tom Hardy. People will go and it'll probably turn a minor profit, so that's better than a loss. Marvel is no longer printing money with movies. DC hasn't been. They've been losing money. We'll see what the reboot with James Gunn can do. Sony needs to chill out. After 2024, no more live action movies. See where the finale to the Spider-Verse takes you and then really figure out what you're going to do. Why make a movie just to lose money? You might as well just somehow negotiate selling back the rights to Marvel. Now, one last screen-related thing. We'll go from movies to TV. I recently started watching the comedy Loudermilk on Netflix. This stars Ron Livingston from Swingers and Office Space fame. There are 3 seasons. Each season, I think, is 8 or 10 episodes. Ron Livingston's character, Sam Loudermilk, is a former music critic, and he's a recovering alcoholic. And he runs a substance abuse meeting in a church and is tasked with helping a young girl stay clean who just kind of went south after her dad died. Ron Livingston's character lives with another recovering alcoholic who is his sponsor. And one of the story threads is his sponsor is falling off the wagon and he's drinking again. Sam Loudermilk has, I guess, a crush on his next door neighbor in his apartment complex, but she's, dating someone who is a doctor. So he's navigating that. And Ron Livingston's character in this, I should have led with this, is an absolute prick. Not a people person. I don't know if this is a remnant, and I'm only, I think, like 6 episodes in, if this is a remnant of his alcoholism, how he doesn't like people, or the fact that he was a critic for music, and he actually traveled with bands, wrote books about them. If seeing, that, how musicians live, soured him, he's a prick, and it's awesome. And there's situations where he's saying things that we're thinking. He's been in situations that we've been in, and just kind of letting loose. It's a continuation in a weird way of his Peter character from Office Space, who went through that hypnosis and started not caring about his job and just being very blunt about things. This is him. I can almost see this character 20 years later, because it literally is, 20 years later when the first season of Loudermilk came out, that if he got out of, I guess the end of Office Space, he was working construction. If he got out of construction and started morphing into this character, you can kind of see it. And I think Ron Livingston is the perfect cast for this. Facial expressions, the apathetic look that he has on his face most of the time, how he delivers dry lines, one-liners, getting pissed off. It all works. And there's a couple main, I won't spoil anything else for it, but a couple main story threads that make this obviously a comedy, but one where each episode builds off the next. And I know generally comedies out there do that, but oftentimes there are a lot of one-off episodes for comedies because you're getting, 22, 24 episodes, whereas each season is only 8 to 10. I think the full 3 seasons, there's 28 episodes total. So it feels like while it's a comedy, the story is still building and growing. It is a relatively small ensemble of characters, and maybe that's going to grow in season 2 or season 3. So you're not just watching it for the laughs. You are watching as if you would be watching an hour drama to see how the story progresses week to week and season to season. So if you haven't checked that out, if you're a fan of Ron Livingston, you like Office Space, you like, dark comedy, dry humor, there obviously is swearing. There are some sexual situations. You're not really seeing all that much. You'll know the first episode or 2 if the comedy is your cup of tea, or if you are interested in the story of Sam Loudermilk's character running his group, and and if the young girl that he is helping, if she can kind of stay sober as well. So happy that I found that on Netflix, in addition to a lot of other things that I want to watch and get through. But it's a nice half-hour distraction because it is over the top at times and rude and absurd. And again, I think he shares a lot of the things that we are thinking or feeling in certain situations, and it's really well done. It's done by one of the Farrelly brothers, Peter Farrelly. So remember from, like Dumb and Dumber, There's Something About Mary. There's no gross out humor in this, at least from what I've seen yet, but someone who has strong comedic roots created the show, has directed some of the episodes and written some as well, for whatever that's worth. But that will conclude the podcast for today. Like always, I want to thank you for taking time from your busy schedule to make us part of your listening routine. We will be back next week with another singular podcast, hopefully with some plus content as well. And we will, hopefully by that time, the 49ers will have a new defensive coordinator. We'll dive into that, and we are going to dive into any other Niners news and notes that is relevant and want to share. And we will be going into a deep dive on the defensive side of the ball, player salaries, player cap hits, who might potentially be released, restructured, or extended to make additional cap room for the 49ers so they can keep their core together, as much of their core as they can, for 2024 and 2025 until and then at that point, Brock Purdy's salary is going to balloon to at least 40 times what it is now. But until then, whatever you are doing, stay happy, stay healthy, stay safe, and we will talk soon. Take care.